10 News.
As calls for police reform ring out across the country, many have turned their attention to our area. 7 years ago, Camden rebooted its police force with a focus on community policing and de-escalation.
And last year, it adopted one of the most comprehensive use of force policies in the country. NBC's Stephanie Gosk shows us how things are playing out on the ground.
Camden, New Jersey, less than a decade ago, considered the most dangerous city in America.
Shootings, you wouldn't see any children because they were scared to come out of the house.
This was a rough place.
This was a rough place.
And the attitude of the police force?
It was more of a us versus them mentality. We're the good guys, and if you're not one of the good guys, you're one of the bad guys.
It's absolutely the case.
Former Police Chief Scott Thompson spent the last 7 years trying to change that. In 2013, when the city disbanded the entire police department over budget constraints, political disputes, and union contracts,
platoon attention.
It was an opportunity to start over.
How do you, as police chief, then rebuild it from the ground up?
We were coming off of what was statistically our most violent, deadliest year in the city. We had 67 murders in 2012. Every new recruit that came through the door, they were told, you are going to identify yourself more with being a member of the Peace Corps than you will be a Special Forces operator in the military.
They want you to fall over and hurt yourself.
The hope was to restore the public's trust in law enforcement, or in some cases, build trust where there had never been any. A shift to community policing.
When our recruits graduate the academy, they're immediately put on a footbeat and introduced to the community. All they do is knock on doors and introduce themselves.
Put the ticket books away. Don't look to make an arrest as the first tool that you're pulling out of your toolbox.
At the time, there were streets overrun by drug deals. People were afraid to come outside.
What we did, which has given us sustainability and momentum, is we addressed that issue by engaging and empowering the people to leave their homes. We'd give away free ice cream. We put pop-up barbecues. We would feed the community.
The day we visited, Captain Zach James was handing out coronavirus masks and getting lots of smiles. But 22-year-old Monet Lee wasn't buying any of it.
The relationship with police, and I wouldn't just say in our city, in other cities too, is not good. They don't interact with us.
I never took for granted the fragility of the trust that we started to get. And I think we still have a long way to go to get even more in this city.
The department completely rewrote its use of force guidelines with an emphasis on de-escalation, and the entire force was retrained. Thompson cites this video of a man wielding a knife as the moment he knew cops were getting it.
He was refusing the commands to drop the knife.
Sir, drop the knife.
Officers had tried to use a taser.
Officers followed him patiently for several blocks, waiting for the right moment to make an arrest.
Drop the knife.
There's not a shadow of a doubt in my mind that 6 months prior to that, we would have shot and killed that man.
According to the department, excessive force complaints have dropped 95% since 2014.
We find that if you take the time and attempt to de-escalate, there's less uses of force that are necessary. If you can talk to people, you can talk them right in the handcuffs.
But despite the reforms, there are still problems. This officer punching a man in 2018 was fired, and the video shown to every unit.
We were signaling to every single cop that was absolutely inappropriate, and we were not going to stand for it.
Anthony Ways runs a community youth center in Camden.
Would you say people in Camden, especially the young people that you work with at this center, do they trust the police department?
Not yet, no.
Why?
The intimidating factors still exist. It's not physical as much as it is mental.
We talked to the former police chief who said they focused on use of force and de-escalation, trying to become more guardians of the city as opposed to enforcers in the city. Have you seen that change at all on the streets?
Yes, I have to say that as far as physical combat, I have to say something's changed. They're not jumping out, dunking people in their head no more.
The repeated complaint from residents is that nearly half the police force is white in a city that is more than 90% Black and Hispanic.
How much of a difference would it make to you to have police officers who were from here also be the ones that were walking the streets?
I think it would make a major difference because this is your city. Who better to run it than the people from it?
We have not crossed the finish line here. We're better today than we were yesterday.
Can change happen between the police and black African Americans in America? Hopefully sometime, maybe in the next generation.
That was Stephanie Gosk reporting. Every police officer in Camden now wears a body camera, and any time force is used, a commanding officer will review that video to make sure officers follow the department's use of force guidelines.
And joining us now from Camden are Pastor Amir Khan and Camden County Freeholder Director Lou Capelli Jr. Thank you both for being here. Pastor, let's start with you. You know, we just heard about the successes in Camden and the work that still needs to be done. What do you think are still the biggest issues within the police department and its relationship with the community?
Well, thank you very much again for having us. And like you just heard in the interviews just now, I mean, it's not time to spike the ball yet. Have there been improvements? Absolutely. But we still have a long way to go. One of the big things that they just mentioned earlier was about the trust. And a lot of that trust, if we really want to deal with it, it's got to go back to 8 years ago when it went from a city police force to a county police force, and where most of us signed petitions for referendum to have it go to vote. Instead, the mayor at the time and the president of city council sued the residents, blocked it from going to vote, and it was forced to become a county police force. So that right there is one of the things that doesn't sit well with a lot of the residents. And so you've got to start with the genesis. The genesis is there's a lot of lack of trust because of how it went. And by the way, by the time that went to the appellate court and the superior court, the higher courts, they came back and said the residents were right. It should have went to vote. It should have been a referendum. It should have went to vote that November. So that's where a lot of the residents are feeling right now.
Mr. Capelli, we heard several times that the transformation isn't over. So what is the next step for the police department?
Well, the next step is the continuing efforts to gain the trust of the residents of Camden City. We have far more trust than the city police department had, but we still have a ways to go. I mean, the city police department for a couple of decades was not where it should have been. So we're trying to reverse that. The streets are safer. Certainly a lot more people feel safer, but we have to, it's a day in and day out process of building trust. And the next thing we have to do is to make sure that the force is even more representative of the community than it is now. We have about 54% minorities on our police force right now. We need to increase that. We want to hire more residents, and we are seeking legislation to change the current New Jersey civil service system, because that is the system that prevents us from hiring people from the city, from hiring a force that's more reflective of the community. It also prevents us from promoting minorities. So we have legislation that we're drafting right now to make that change. Hopefully the legislature will pass it and Governor Murphy will sign it.
Pastor Khan, we heard from a man in that story. He said maybe the relationship between police and the black community can change in the next generation. Do you see hope for that on the horizon?
Yeah, I believe it can happen a lot sooner than the next generation. I think Lou and I are in agreement on that. And I'll tell you what we're also in agreement on in reference to the civil service, and that's something I just finished getting off the phone earlier today with one of the captains from the Camden County Police Force. We're joining forces together, going after legislations, talking to Governor Murphy, because that civil service is a problem. And until that is moved out of the way, as it is in Cherry Hill and other municipalities, that you can actually go ahead and bypass the civil service. Now the Camden County Police Force, the way it is, or going back to the Camden City Police Force, can hire Camden residents. So no, I don't agree with that. I believe it can happen a lot quicker than the next generation.
So many people are watching what you all are doing right there in Camden. Pastor Amir Khan and Camden County Freeholder Lou Capelli Jr., thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And right now on NBC10.com, you can learn more about Camden's road to reinventing its police force. You can look for our special coverage at NBC10.com/Camden, and we'll be right back.